The regions are going to be saying to the WRU, you need to keep the 60 cap rule because that's our only way of getting the Callum Sheedys and etc. back. And it's good for the URC if it happens, but you got to be able to, like, if you can't afford to keep the likes of Corey Hill, and keep him in Wales, which they would have wanted to do, well, then how have you got the money to go and bring, the other lads back?
That like Welsh club rugby is an interesting kind of culture, I think. Just from my understanding of it anyway, and you've had Sean Fitzpatrick actually come out this week discussing it and saying that the regions, like the players need to play for the regions more and stuff like that. Like, how did you find kind of the transition from France to Wales to a club that's, like you said, it's kind of on its knees, and stuff like that?
So I think so when I joined Leinster, so I joined Leinster 2005. Leinster obviously had a huge amount of talent, but we were underachieving, right? And part of the reason we were underachieving was we didn't have that club first mentality. Okay, right. So Leinster's everything to you, and if you get to go to play for Ireland, obviously that becomes huge. But you have responsibility when you wear a blue jersey to perform. And in Wales, bar the Scarlets and the Ospreys back when they had money, they were able to sign the Galacticos, create a really good identity, which was difficult because you were merging, Swansea and Neath, two rival clubs, but they did build a real sense of identity. And people like, they had generational players like Alan Wynne-Jones and Tiprick and Dan Biggar and Rhys Webb, etc. So, sometimes the coaches and the administrators like to take the credit for creating this identity, whereas the reality is, really strong, driven playing group will do that anyway. So if you have a team with Alan Wynne-Jones, Dan Biggar in it, you can pretty sure they're going to have an identity. And that's the key. So the Scarlets obviously have it a little bit easier because of the location, so they're West Wales, great rugby tradition, and a lot of their players have come from that area and are very proud and the Welsh language and all that stuff, and obviously they're talented players. And then when you're a foreign player or you bring in something from the outside, they go into that, that becomes their norm, right? So the challenge probably the Dragons have had is that it was seen as being a stepping stone or a last stop for somebody, and obviously the ambition wasn't there, and that's not the fault of the coaches. That's just down to finance, really. They were in survival mode. So, but the biggest issue the Welsh regions have is that the Welsh public don't really support them unless they're on a massive winning curve or winning run, and likewise, it's the be all and end all is playing for Wales. And I look at, if you play in front of 2,000 or 3,000 people, it's like my story about the Pro D2. If you play in front of 2,000 or 3,000 people, on a weekly basis, and your training facilities are pretty average, which in general they are compared to the top clubs, your atmosphere at your games is pretty average. The games aren't that important in overall scheme of things, and suddenly then you arrive on a bus driving through Cardiff on a Six Nations match day. You come out into the stadium. They only have to go to the well emotionally, a lot less than the Irish players who are playing in European Cup semi-finals, quarterfinals, Pro 14 finals, semi-finals, big derby matches. It's in some ways it's easier to peak for those 7 or 8 international games, but that's the challenge is to get the regions winning, I think, and to do that you need top players, and at the moment, because of financial constraints, it's going to be difficult. You saw Corey Hill leaving to go to Japan. Rhys Webb had to go away. Like, it's just the 60 cap rule is very important. If they keep that, they'll obviously keep Welsh players there, but maybe they can't afford to keep it, really.
No, and then you see kind of those young players like Uleri Zamets and all that are going to have to come back at some stage, and I'm sure, although they'll be in good environments, or like Callum Sheedy and stuff, who are doing great in the Premiership, love Premiership rugby, but if they're told, like, if you stay there you won't be able to play for Wales, they should be back in a heartbeat, to whether that's your Cardiff Blues, your Ospreys, whatever. So as you said, it's kind of that that culture in Wales is all about the national team, and it works for them. So that's how it works.
It's going to be harder though to. So like I was involved in bringing Ross Moriarty back because of the 60 cap rule from Gloucester. It's going to be harder to bring. I think it's going to, like, I think the 60 cap rule should be for players maybe who had options to stay in Wales or whatever. Like Lewis Rees-Salmon and Callum Sheedy have come through because of Gloucester, and Ross Moriarty, for instance, came through really because of Gloucester and Hartpury. So it's a hard one to bring them, to force them to come back, I think, and also have they the money to like give those guys realistic compensation to play for a Welsh region as the English Premiership clubs. I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, especially like it's that balance, because obviously you want to develop the regional game in Wales, but at the same time, the English Premiership, I would argue, is probably one of the best leagues in the Northern Hemisphere, if not one of the best leagues in the world, playing competitive rugby week in, week out. So like your Sheedies and your Rees-Salmons, they're getting developed, or Dan Bigger at this rate. Obviously, he's got 60 caps, but like they're getting developed at a lot.
I think Dan Bigger has improved at Saints, and that's not saying he wasn't brilliant. But if you look at how the Saints play under Chris Boyd, and I think like it adds as well. I mean, if you have Dan Bigger out of the Ospreys, now they've got Garrett Anscombe, so that means there should be 4 quality 10s playing for Welsh regions. Plus you have Dan Bigger, Callum Sheedy. Suddenly you have six very good 10s to play. Whereas you bring Callum Sheedy and Dan Bigger back to Wales, there's no guarantee that the 2 guys they replace will find first team places in Premiership. So it's a huge one for Wayne Pivac and the WRU. The problem is the regions are going to be saying to the WRU, you need to keep the 60 cap rule, because that's our only way of getting the Callum Sheedies and etc. back. And it's good for the URC if it happens, but you got to be able to, like, if you can't afford to keep the likes of Corey Hill, and keep him in Wales, which they would have wanted to do, well then how have you got the money to go and bring the other lads back?